Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Today, Lawson.
I love it. I love it when we come in hot like that, like sliding in sideways, see each other. Good to see you.
Good to see you, man. You know, you guys might think listening to this podcast, we spend months planning each episode. Sometimes.
I bet they don't.
Okay, fair point. Today, what we're going to talk about, today and next week, actually, a little mini series, we're going to talk about 4 fatherhood traps that every dad can accidentally step into. And we might step on some toes, and probably you and me, Lawson, have both been in or out of these traps over the years. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about 4 fatherhood traps. We're going to talk about 2 of them today, and then we're going to talk about 2 of them next week. So this will be like a 2-week mini series. Mini series. I mean,
that's good. I like this.
Yeah, it's
really
going to be fun.
And I like that. I like the word traps because, you know, we were kind of struggling with, is it philosophies? Is it fatherhood myths or whatever? I don't know. Traps is appropriate. Like you just said, like we've all stepped in at times.
Yeah, for sure.
And so what's good about having you know, something like this is it's always great when someone ahead of you spots a trap and then points at it, you know, like you're like, okay, got it. I won't step there.
Exactly. The other day I was driving home from school and I didn't realize, my boy's bringing my kids home. I didn't realize that the road ahead, there had been an accident, you know, and so there was cars coming at me. It's dark, it's rainy, it's night, you know, the road is twisty, windy, and there are cars coming back at me and they're flicking their lights off and on. Right. And I thought, gosh, you know, what is it? Is there like a cop up there? Is there a speed trap? And then I finally get up there and realize everybody's trapped. Like no one can go anywhere. And cars are backing up and you're on this road where if you back up too far, you go off the cliff kind of thing. And so I couldn't heed the warnings fast enough. And I found myself having to turn around. So what we're going to talk about is, for better or for worse, right? I deal with a lot of fathers, both nationally, internationally, live, face-to-face, through emails. We hear comments on our podcast where guys will come in and tell us what they're kind of struggling with or wrestling with. And I see some common traps that dads step into. And the really tricky thing about them, Lawson, is parts of them are really legit and very honorable, right? That's like, oh, that's a good idea. Till you kind of peel it back a couple layers and go, oh, I see how that sort of breaks down. Sometimes these traps are kind of fashioned out of a mishmash of inputs. So we might take, you know, some Bible verses. We might take some of our favorite author. We might take some modern psychology, a little bit of Western capitalism, a little American cowboyism. We may take some political preference. We may take some Adam Smith economic laissez-faire. Like we kind of take this whole basket and we put it all together and we fashion our own kind of fatherhood approach. And usually where that leads us is a place where we're mostly correct or mostly on target, but not exactly on target. And then we keep stepping in that trap over and over again. And then we lead our kids down those same traps. And to make it easy to remember, we decided to put the 4 traps in an acrostic that, guess what it spells if you put the first 4 letters in a row, Lawson?
4 letters, 1 word. Sounds like trap.
So TRAP,
very clever.
right? Age old. This is an easy one. TRAP. So here are the 4 traps. Can I cover them real quick and then we'll dive into the first couple?
Yeah.
So
I think so.
Overview, flyover. The 4 traps are these. Trap number 1 is the trap of tradition. And what it sounds like is, well, this is how my granddaddy did it. This is how my daddy did it. And this is how we're going to do it. Again, may not be a bad thing. Maybe your granddaddy and dad did it really well. So we do want to learn, but it's the trap of tradition that starts with the letter T. Okay. Tradition. The second trap is the trap of replication. replication. Now, it may sound like, didn't you just say that? No, the trap of replication is one where I want my kids to turn out exactly like me, all the same preferences, all the same opinions. And so I'm going to force that on them. That's the trap of replication. The third trap.
Yeah. There's a difference.
Yeah. Like one is just repeating the past. One is I am the role model and they're going to do everything like me. And we'll kind of break them apart today. And we're going to talk about the traps of tradition and replication on today's podcast. Next week, we're going to cover the other two fatherhood traps. And that is the trap of advancement. And what we mean by that is it sounds like this. Well, I just want my kids to have it better than I did. And that's code usually for economic opportunity. Usually is what that's code for, or educational opportunity. So we're going to break apart. And again, a lot of these have a lot of very good, God-honoring, biblical ideas floating around them. They're just not quite on target all the way. The final trap is the trap of performance, And it's the idea that as long as our kids are successful, we've all heard dads say that. Oh, as long as my kids are successful, I'm going to feel good about being a dad. So it's the traps of tradition, replication, advancement, and performance, TRAP, if you're keeping score at home. So, Lawson, the trap of tradition sounds like this. Man, for, 9 generations, we've always done it this way, and we're going to do it the rest of the way. And what's the good news and the bad news of that particular trap? Let's break, because it's not all bad, right? Your dad or your grandfather, I know some guys who are preachers, and they're like 3rd generation Christian preachers. And they'll look back on their earthly dad or their grandfather with a lot of fondness and want to replicate some of what their dad or granddad did. And so some of those traditions that have been handed down from grandfather to father, I mean, that's kind of the biblical model, right? Isn't that how it's supposed to work, Lawson?
Yeah, that's right. First of all, I think it's interesting that when you go into this, you had to go to your Kentucky Colonel voice impression, because
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why I did that. Hope I didn't offend anybody.
Well, my granddaddy did it. So I have two examples, two actually friends of mine. One where in their case, the tradition of in their case, it was building of a business. And it was literally that this guy's great grandfather started it back in, the early mid 1900s. And then his grandfather took over. It's a great business. It grew. Then his father took over. And there was enormous pressure on this guy to do the same thing and to follow in their footsteps. And it was unhealthy to a point that it kind of, caused a rift between he and his dad, because he was uninterested in the business. It didn't excite him. He was not at all like his father. And so, imagine taking over a business that's been run by this guy for 25 years, and you are vastly different from him. But the expectation is that you just step into those shoes. Right. That's not realistic. And so that it ultimately turned into this. It didn't fall apart, but that didn't work out. And I think they've healed since then. But the point is, that I'm trying to make in that particular example, and I've got another one where it was beautiful, to your point of, just because it's one of these traps doesn't mean that it's necessarily all bad. In that case, it didn't work. So what I was getting at was the pressure on, like, he knew from when he was a young man that the expectation was that we've already got your life kind of mapped out for you.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
That's rough, man. That can be rough.
Yeah. Well, in the other case, though, it was different, and it did work out. I'm in a business where a lot of our customers are kind of mid-size companies, and a lot of them are family businesses. And the daughter now, a little bit younger than me, but the daughter is now moving into the president and CEO role soon. Everybody knows it. Yeah. She's been part of their company for a long, long time. She's got her own style, very different from her father. And they are managing it really, really well. And they're great people, and the business is doing good. They're a good customer, and I love to see it. So a couple of things to underline is, for the tradition part, I think there is an inordinate amount of pressure Whereas the other three, they also have pressure, but there's just nothing the same as like, you're part of this lineage. Like that carries a lot of gravity to it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it comes in the form of business, like you said. Sometimes it comes in the form of, this will sound silly, right? This will sound silly, but families have split over this. Like literally, sports fans, like it literally come down and go, we've always been, fill in the blank, such and such fans of a sports team. And like,
right.
The dad feels some like spiritual obligation to pass on the certain colors of his, goodness gracious.
That's a good example. Yeah, right. That's
and you
weird.
think, really? But some are, right?
Right.
Some are a little more, man, you'll throw a bomb in the middle of the podcast and get a bunch of angry emails. Would you like to do that just for fun? Let's just do it. Some people will hand down certain traditions that are where you go to church. So for example, I go to X church, and if my kids are actual Christians, they'll end up at my church. And if they end up across town at that quote unquote other church, I'm not talking about them going to like the local Wicca chapter and becoming a Satan worshiper. That's one thing. But like they go from, First Baptist to Second Baptist, and everybody gets mad because they're no longer at, the traditional. It could even be in the same vein, right? Same basic kind of belief structure. But man, sometimes church choice becomes this tradition thing that if your kids pick a different church, well, they're going to hell in a handbasket. And you just think, I've failed as a father because I didn't reproduce a faithful fill in the blank, and you think, man, what are some other ways? Business, sports, church type.
And a bigger question too, like what's the antidote for that? Like, how can we talk about it? And I don't know, like what is if I'll tell you this, in my first example, I know the guy, because he's told me, the father of the son didn't want to do it, didn't work out. That father, I also know, has said things like, if I could do it differently, and so, okay, let's go back in time now and talk to people who are maybe right now listening and are either in the midst of being the father who is pressing that tradition as the way, and or the son or daughter who's listening, who says, yeah, I'm under extreme pressure to follow this tradition. And so, okay, well, what do we do about that? How do you have an open mind enough to change that course?
Man, I'm thinking of the Bible verse about traditions of men. And I believe it is in Mark chapter 7. And it says, you have disregarded the commandment of God. This is Mark 7, verse 8. You have disregarded the commandment of God to keep the tradition of men. And so right there, I think we have a picture of the antidote. And the antidote is being able to separate in our minds tradition from commandment. And that's where people are going to fight over it, right? Where they're like, oh, well, God commanded you take communion every Sunday, so you have to go to a church that does every Sunday. Like, people will fight over what is a tradition and what is a commandment. I get it. But we're clearly told in Mark 7, verse 8, they worship me in vain. They teach as doctrine the precepts of men. You have disregarded the commandment of God to keep the tradition of men. So the antidote is, can we take these traditions of men and ask ourselves, are these traditions that might even be good ones, right? They may be really good ones. I've always been a member of the library or the Optimist Club, or I've volunteered at the bake sale or whatever. And that may be a good civic service, but I'm not obligated by scripture to be part of the county bake sale. Like it's just not a commandment in scripture. And we commingle them, right? We take the commandments of scripture, traditions of men, put them in a stew, blend them together, and then drink them and go, that's the only way. And so one of the antidotes is, can we discern? We may not agree entirely, but can we discern some things are commandments of God and some things are traditions of men?
Yeah. And you made me think, so take volunteering at fill in the blank, whatever your thing is as a dad. And are you trying to force your kid or your family into that exact same potential, that exact cause? or are you trying to teach volunteerism?
Yeah, great way to put it. And sometimes when we're looking at like if our dad did it, like I remember I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and my dad was really involved in a couple volunteer arenas. One was in the sports league where I played as a kid. He was on the board. He helped with the finances. He helped with the scheduling. He helped with the field maintenance. You know, he was a big time volunteer at our sports league. I continue to volunteer as a sports coach at our church, different league, same town, different league. So in some ways, yeah, I'm kind of like, you know, coaching like my dad did. However, it's not the same exact league. And if I decided not to do that for a season or a year, I wouldn't feel like I was somehow dishonoring the Evans family legacy, right?
Right.
He was also involved in what we call in Louisville, I think it might be now called the Derby Parade. It was then, maybe it's still called, I can't remember, but it was called the Pegasus Parade. It was the big parade that we had downtown before Derby every year. It just happened a few weeks ago. And he was a volunteer. I remember going and seeing the floats and seeing things behind the scenes. And so had he told me, look, son, I'm handing down, you know, the yellow jacket with the snaps on the front, and you're going to have to be a volunteer. And he kind of pinned his fatherhood success or failure on whether he reproduced a new Pegasus Parade volunteer. And when we talk about it out loud, it sounds kind of silly, but there are a number of dads who I know are hanging their hat on the failure or success of their fatherhood as to whether they keep some tradition going. It's a place they all go. It's a family reunion. It's a certain organization they all support. And it's from legacy gone past, and they're super concerned about replicating it. So that's the trap of tradition.
Well, hang on before we go to the replication. I think they aren't necessarily traps, period. I think they are potential fatherhood traps. And the reason I say potential is because some of this can produce some real interesting, godly fruit. In fact, I think tradition can provide stability, predictability. There's a comfort. There's a pride. I'm not saying a pride in the sense of you're an overly proud or arrogant person, but a pride in the legacy, because maybe you've been born into some amazing godly legacy, and God's called you to continue that. You know, just because we are calling it a trap doesn't mean necessarily that it's all negative. Yeah. I think it's more like, hey, let's just make sure that you aren't in this, that you're not in this in a bad way. You know, recognize it, and maybe let's talk some more about what are the different antidotes of countering it if you find that you're in a situation like this and it's not maybe what God's calling you to do.
Man, great word. Great word. Hey, Dad, sometimes you need weekly encouragement on your father journey. That's why we built a community of men that are basically the Navy SEALs of godly fatherhood. They are all located at fatheronpurpose.org. That's fatheronpurpose.org. Now, that is a monthly subscription of just 11 measly US dollars. And when you join that community, you will get action items that are brief and biblical, and you can put into play right away. Every week, we release a dad mission video that is a short devo based on the Bible with an action item mission at the end, super practical. And plus, as a bonus, when you dive in, you get digital courses, ebooks, all kinds of other resources, not to mention you're connected with dozens of other godly dads who are walking through the same issues you're walking through, and that community is very rich and vibrant. Come check it out today at fatheronpurpose.org. That's fatheronpurpose.org. That's one of the reasons these things have the potential to be so sticky and tricky, is because they're not 100% bad. They're not 100% bad. I think let's go ahead and go to the second one and keep this idea going. Same idea, right? The second trap is one we call the trap of replication. And it's similar to tradition in a sense, in that you're trying to reproduce something. It's starting with you. So you're saying, look, here's the way I do life, right? I wash the car every Saturday morning at 9. And if you're a Christian, you're going to wash your car just like I do. I vote a certain way in elections in America. And if you're actually going to be a believer, you're going to vote like me. And so down you go, right? It's everything from how long your hair is to whether you get a tattoo to all of it. But the center point, right? The anchor point of this trap is how I do it. And so my desire as a dad is to say, man, I want my kids to process every decision, make every choice, just like I would make every choice. And here's the thing, right? As you were saying a minute ago, do I make a lot of good choices? Oh, sure. Yeah. There's a lot of things I think I do that I do pretty decent. And so I'm telling it's good to ask questions and listen. It's good to be calm. It's good to not call people hateful names when you're trying to get to the bottom of a thorny issue. Like there's some things that I am trying to teach my kids that are part of my approach to life that I do want to replicate. I think the danger and the where this trap does become a trap is when every single thing I do, how I organize my closet, to whether or not, I go to certain retail outlets because of the policies they support, to and on it goes. I've got this big, long checklist. And if my kids don't turn out just like me in every way, I'm somehow failing as a dad. And I think that's just off target. What do you think, Lawson?
I have wondered before. I've got a buddy named Earl. He's got two beautiful young sons who I don't know all the ins and outs of PGA, but judging from their Facebook and some of the stuff he posts, they go to all these PGA courses and they're winning these titles and all that. It looks like they're on the road to being real. I guess what's the next step after? They go to college, got to play in college probably, but I mean, judging from what I can see, it looks like, dude, they might be on their way to playing golf for a living. And he loves it. Yeah. And he was a great golfer. He eats, breathes, and sleeps it, and Audrey, my wife, my youngest daughter, Olivia, we've heard them referred to Olivia as a mini me, right. A little Audrey. And they love that, that's not bad. But I have also, and I want to be really careful how I think this through. If the motive behind a dad being, I think of it as like almost consumed with his kids being a replica of himself, is that stemming from some sort of insecurity? Is it stemming from some sort of maybe, I don't know, pride in not a good way of, if my kid isn't just like me, they're not going to be good enough, or they're not going to live up to my expectation or standard. I want to look around and go, yep, I am great. And there's another one of me and another one of me. And, like these little replicas that reflect back to you. Like what? Yeah. What are you looking for? Yeah. I don't think that's healthy. And if I offend somebody, I don't mean to, but I do think it's worthy of kind of kicking around the idea and test your motives.
I think it all comes down to motive, right? To your point, is my motive. So for example, I like to read scripture and I think that's a good discipline. And I want to teach my kids that discipline. Okay. So there we are. Now, do I want to teach them that discipline because if they do it, I feel validated? Ooh, that's slippery slope, right? Very slippery slope. Do I want them to do that discipline so others will notice and go, gee, what a great dad they have, right? And you kind of go, I love hearing that. I ran the focus groups, but like, I don't, sorry, little elf quote there for those of you paying attention. James Caan, thank you. But I think that the motive is all of it, right? The motive is all of it. Yeah, there are definitely things I want my kids to replicate. However, I also know that there is this thing called the body of Christ. And in scripture, we see numerous times where the Apostle Paul and the Gospels mostly Paul's letters talk about the body of Christ. Certain people have certain skills and capacities. And we're not all one thing. We're not all the pinky toe. We're not all the earlobe. We're not all one thing. And part of the reason for that is the world needs all of these things brought to bear. And I am not God. I can't be everything. And so God lets me be just, the left pinky, and he needs you to be the right thumb. And we've got to appreciate that. And sometimes I think as parents, we think our job is to be perfection and then transfer our perfection to our kids. And you're like, well, there's so much wrong with that, right?
There's so much weight to carry and all that.
Yeah.
And then it's tiring.
And then our kids make one decision that we wouldn't make. And we think, oh, I've failed. Now, granted, if they decide to like rob a bank or something, yeah, that's a sad day. I mean, you don't want to see that happen. But for the most part, we want to replicate ourselves. And you nailed it. I think we got to go back to what is the motive for the replication.
Yeah. As you were talking, so I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who maybe they're listening to this and going, yikes. I think they're talking to me. It's okay. Like Audrey and Olivia take great pride in kind of people recognizing some of their similarities. I take great pride when someone sees a similarity in my children of me. That's natural. That's good. That's not a bad thing. But is it because maybe you are needing something from your child that you aren't getting in your own life, without them? And so I wonder, like, is it, we should celebrate differences, like you mentioned. God makes us all different than each other for a reason, for a very specific reason. He knows exactly how he wants to use each of us in his plan for our lives. And so I guess let me pause there. But if you're struggling as a dad with, you wish your kid was, X, Y, Z, whatever, fill in the blank, more like you or just like you, and they're just not. Dude, celebrate that. God doesn't make mistakes. God has designed them exactly the way he wanted them to be. And he is hoping that you can help him guide and direct them according to their gift that is very different potentially from you or what you may have wanted or expected.
I'll tell you one way I've done this almost a little bit selfishly, right? And I've done this where we have I call it like a non-competitive league that our kids have played soccer in for about 10 years, no longer than that, 15. And I love the soccer season, right? Starts late August, goes through October. It's super lightweight. We practice maybe once a week. Games are fun. Like generally speaking, it's not a super high competitive sports league. And so in that light, for me, it's about 8 or 10 weeks of scheduled fun with my kids, right? The way I look at it. So, however, if I continued to make my children play every fall because it's fun for dad, because that is fun for me, that's when we would be crossing a line. Right. And so every year I kind of let them re-up or dive out, and they've always chosen to re-up because it's fun and I'm going to be there anyway. And so, but there's a fine line there. Right? There's almost this expectation in the Evans house that, hey, come August, we're going to go play in the church soccer league. And that could cross the line to where it's not super healthy if my kids don't like it or if they just aren't inclined athletically and they don't enjoy it. Now that's the way I've done it. And I think it's healthy, but it sure runs the risk of becoming not healthy. Another way that we've tried to do it around our house is my son, Alex, who's 22, he played the music, right? If you listen to our podcast, you've heard Alex playing the guitar because he's our front bumper music. And he was so good at guitar and loved it, right? Even from his teenage years. And I don't know a thing about guitar. I don't know anything about it. I can't play a note. I don't understand music theory. But from the age he was, 11, 12, first picked the guitar up all the way through before he left for college, we had 100 conversations about guitars, right? But I only understood about 15% of it, and he was explaining all this to me and going, well, you see it. I'm going, no, I don't see, and do it again. So, and in that sense, I'm celebrating the fact that the way I celebrate the fact that he's not wired like me, he won't be a mini me, is by just engaging in his world. Even though I don't fully understand it, I didn't want to go, hey, stop all that guitar playing, become a marketing guy, right? Write some books, goodness gracious. I got to that place where I realized I don't want to replicate me, man. That's not my objective. And so if a dad's out there and you're kind of trapped in this trap, or you've gone too far down the road of tradition and you're simply trying to blindly repeat whatever your predecessors did, or you're in this trap of replication where your ego and pride has you wrapped up in trying to recreate yourself through your children. Let's talk a little bit about some antidotes as we wrap up today, Lawson. I think one antidote goes back to that Mark chapter 7. And it's this idea that we look for the commandments of God, and we put those in the bucket of things that we want to aim for. We don't have to put in, whether you always are going to be an, Alabama football fan or whatever. I'm just use that as an example. Kentucky basketball, if you don't cheer for the Cats, you're no son of mine, that kind of thing. Because believe it or not, that may sound funny, but there are some parents out there who really, really believe that. And then secondly, another antidote would be, I think you used the word first today, Lawson, would be like celebrating the differences. So it's this idea that when you see a penchant, a talent, a skill, a predisposition in your kids that's towards something that's not talking towards evil, they're not going toward something crazy, but they're going towards something and they're just bent that way. You might be a guy who loves to hunt and fish, for example.
Yeah, but that's a good one.
And you're raising a child who's okay. They'll go to spend time with you. They're not like hateful about it, but that's just not their thing. They just don't love it as much as you do. Well, as a dad, guess what you're going to have to do? You're going to not have to. It's free country. Do as you wish. I would encourage you strongly to occasionally consider, if I softened it enough, Lawson, that's as soft as I can make it, occasionally consider skipping one day of hunting season so you can go watch your kid play golf or watch him compete in a singing competition or whatever he likes to do that isn't your thing. I remember years ago, man, I heard a guy named Tim, and Tim was talking, and he said, I'm still looking through the Bible, trying to find the verse where the wife is supposed to lay down her life for the husband. And he goes, and darn, as much as I try, I just can't find it. But I can find plenty of verses where the husband is supposed to lay down his life for the wife, in the sense that I put her needs above mine, just like Jesus came down and laid his life down for the church. And I think there's a principle in there that applies to our children. Instead of making my children pivot toward my preferences and my desires, I'm going to try to pivot toward theirs. Again, I'm talking about the ones that are in bounds. If my kid likes getting drunk every Friday, we're not going to go out on a beer bash. Like, that's not what I'm going to try and do. But in bounds, man, I really want to get to that place where my kids can pull me in to their areas of interest so that I don't fall into these traps of tradition or replication. What do you think, Lawson?
You made me remember. Yeah, you reminded me something. When the girls were in high school, they were both in musical theater. And I didn't know much about it at all, but found myself kind of digging it. I liked seeing them perform and do little things, and proud of them. They were actually decent at it. So, it was enjoyable, but there was a lot of practices, and it could get old.
If I'm honest,
the same thing over and over and over. They're rehearsing this, one scene over and over and over. And I remember once and there was a boy, I can call him boy, he's 14, 15, maybe, I guess back then, on stage playing one of the main characters. And he was great. He could sing, he could dance. Everybody loved him. And I didn't know anything about him, but it was sitting in the audience one day as they were practicing. Nobody else hardly was around. I was on my phone. Look over, and there's this dude in blue jeans, boots, cut off Carhartt shirt, tattoos, hat turned around backwards, earring, unshaven, gruff looking dude. But his tattoo was Harley Davidson. We were sitting close enough, and I just leaned over and asked him what kind of bike he had, because I had one too. And so we struck it up and, made friendly conversation. And then, I don't know, 5-10 minutes later, I said something to the effect of, whose kid are you here for? He's clearly not there.
Just for the performance.
Right. Right. And he pointed, and it was that almost opposite of him, young boy up on stage performing and singing. And I didn't say anything, but I wondered, how's he feel about that? And he volunteers. He goes, I have zero interest in this. I don't know anything about it. I think it's weird, but God, he he sure does love it, and I love him. So I'm going to give it my all and see what it's all about. And I thought, dude, I really applaud the fact that you are sitting here. You've watched them rehearse this scene 6-7 times. I almost get choked up about it. Like, he could not, that was the last place he wanted to be. And he gave up of himself, well, whatever he wanted to do. And I bet you that wasn't the first time. You could just see it in his
Right.
eyes when he was lighting up, talking about his son that was doing the opposite of everything in his fiber that he would want to do. And so I think there's a model in that for all of us, that it doesn't have to be what has always been done in your family, passed down through the legacy from one generation to the next. And it doesn't have to reflect and be a replica of yourself to be fantastic. It can be exactly what your kid is about, what he needs, the way God designed him or her. And you, Dad, are along for the ride. And that's okay. You are there to help guide and steer and hear from God and play your part according to God's plan in their life.
Man, Lawson, what a powerful story. That is a great place for us to end on this week. Dads, we've covered the first 2 traps, possible traps of fatherhood in tradition and replication. And next week, we'll cover the traps of advancement and performance. Those also kind of go together. So we look forward to seeing you next week. From me and Lawson here at Manhood Journey World Headquarters. I'm just kidding. I don't know where that came from. Thank you for listening in. Share the podcast. Come to our website, manhoodjourney.org/podcast, and let us know if we can answer your questions or commiserate with your fatherhood challenges anytime. Let us know. Lawson, thank you so much for co-hosting with me again today. And what a great story to end on. Thank you for sharing it, bro.
Yep. Talk to y'all next week.
Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.